Peace, family. We are living in wild and glorious times. Thank you for being on this journey with Sacred Sons. Thank you to those of you who have already joined us and done the deep work for yourself, for your family, for your community, and ultimately for all of humanity on this planet. That is the work we are doing. And I have to say, it's not always pretty. Sometimes it has to get messy. Sometimes it's going to be primal. We're going to play, we're going to pray, we're going to sing, we're going to scream. So for my brothers who are ready to be initiated into this work of masculine alchemy, who are ready to shed it all, who are ready to let it all go, Sacred Sons has some incredible events happening all around the world. Coming up next, we will be in Lisbon, Portugal, March 30th through 31st for a Sacred Sons immersion. After that, the immersion is coming to Maplewood, New Jersey, April 6th through 7th. And then Midwest, get ready. Sacred Sons is finally coming home to St. Louis, Missouri, April 13th and 14th. We're making a big push into the Midwest of the United States. So for those of you who are born and raised in the Midwest, stand up, join Sacred Sons this year. After that, Maui Mana, April 17th through 21st. This is an incredible rites of passage experience for brothers who are going through deep life transformation, for those who are ready to deepen into the wisdom of the land. Come to Maui Mana, led by Kale Kahi. After that, we have 2 more opportunities for a rites of passage Vision Quest experience called Wild Rites, led by Darren Silver. The next Wild Rites is happening in Poetry, Georgia, April 24th through 28th, and then going all the way across the pond, May 8th through May 12th in Wales, UK. Let's go. In 2024, this work is an absolute requirement for men. If you're listening to this, if you feel this, we have events coming to Texas, Vancouver, BC, Wales, Colorado, Atlanta, Georgia, Los Angeles, California. Go to sacredsons.com. Get to the event closest to you. At checkout, use the code all caps Brotherhood for 10% off. If you're a brother who needs the support, we got you too. Go to sacredsons.com, apply for a scholarship. With that, we will see you on the other side. Much love, fam. The one and only Teal Swan is here, the thought leader, the spiritual leader.
It's not really an option for us as individuals to not commit to the path of awakening and awareness. We can't just move through this life in an unconscious way. I want to stress that every single thing you do impacts your descendants. Everything. Every action, every word, every decision, everything you heal or don't heal, everything. It's not until we accept whatever consequence we're going to choose that we're able to actually meet those consequences in such a constructive way. And so much of expansion, human expansion, happens when a person finally does that. So the opportunity that exists on the other side of this endurism within the human race is that when we're really looking at the consequences that we're afraid of that are making us keep these detrimental, structures there, and we're like, all right, I could face fill in the blank. Now, all of a sudden, you have an open door for inventions, new ways of going about it.
Peace, family. Adam Jackson here with a special episode of the Sacred Sons podcast. Here we are in this year of 2024. Some might call it a year of destruction lust. Some might say it's a year of specific action and of making decisions. And with that, our guest today, she has said these things. The one and only Teal Swan is here. And I am just so appreciative of you, Teal, for being here, for sharing your gifts, for continuing to share your gifts. For those that don't know, Teal is an OG. And I'm talking about an OG in this, not only in the thought leader, the spiritual leader, but also, Teal, I've been watching your videos for over a decade. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Just what is it like for you to see the rise of all of these now thought leaders sharing their opinions and blathering their thoughts on the internet, while you have been one who has done it so poignantly?
To be totally authentic with you, it drives me crazy. I think the frustration that I have is that right now it's like people who are willing to play the algorithm games, regardless of what that looks like, are the ones who get the most attention, regardless of whether it's good content or not. So I feel like I spend most of my life trying to undo what has been popularly seen and having huge arguments with, of course, a very large team of people, all of whom want to, for business sake, be able to compete in this game where I don't really feel like competing in the game, you know? We have so many conversations, business conversations, about how important it is to speak to hot topics, you know? And there's a lot of hot topics I don't want to touch. So you could slide a lot of situations across my table that would get me a lot more viewership, but I would just be like a dancing monkey dancing for the sake of algorithms. And I dislike it just as much as I dislike watching other people who are willing to do that all of a sudden, you know, be in this position that I quite frankly don't think they deserve to be in. So this is not a really fun time to be in such a flooded market.
This is why we love you though, Teal, because you bring the truth. You speak the truth. And, you know, you have been a mirror for millions of people as they have been on their spiritual path, as they have worked through their emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual traumas. Like you were in the game before the game even existed. I want to honor you as such, you know, because I know that. And so, like, yeah, to be a mirror for millions at a time when we look in the mirror, maybe we don't like what we see.
Yeah.
That's a big responsibility.
Yeah, and it feels like an ever-increasing responsibility as the time goes on. I have to say that the pressure has mounted. It's definitely felt like it increased and increased and increased. You know, it's been interesting to watch.
Yeah. Pressure. Do you believe that pressure is external? Do you believe that you put that on from the inside out, you know?
I think it goes hand in hand. I really very much feel like we are less able to tolerate opposing opinions than ever, which is crazy to me, seeing as how you see this huge rise in sort of liberal ideology in the world. And liberals, if you want to define them, are essentially the people who would tote themselves to be the people who are the most open and wanting of constructive debate. And yet we're watching this mass movement within liberal culture of cancellation and intolerance, in fact. So that has put fire under the butts of, like, all of these youth, you know, the millennials, but especially the Gen Z generation that's coming up and controlling social media. And it's like you are in a very dangerous game with them. So that dangerous game naturally, you know, puts people in my position in a place where I have to be very conscientious about what it is that I'm doing and saying if I would like to stay in the space.
Totally. And you know what's interesting about that for me is, like, you're one who also does work around authenticity. And so to be judged for that authenticity, and we have to, in some ways, we have to expect it. You know, the thought leaders, the spiritual leaders who have come before, they have all had to go through their type of persecution. I don't think you can have one without the other. You know, it's not just going to be putting people on pedestals, because we know what that leads to, right? So.
No, not right now, especially.
Yeah. So cool. Is there anything, you know, on your heart? Is there anything in your space? Is there anything that's alive within you, just as we check in here on this beautiful day?
Answering that intuitively, it's kind of interesting, because before I got on this interview, I was sent a video, which is a clip of Jimmy Kimmel. It's like an episode of him talking about bias, and it impacted me immensely today. It sort of threw me back into the terror of not being able to penetrate people's realities. I thought it was a really ingenious episode, this particular one, because he had somebody go out on the street and find several Trump supporters. And what the interviewer did was to ask them how they felt about these certain things, like the president having done these certain things. And they said that it was Biden. How do you feel about Biden doing these things, right? And of course, they were like massively disapproving. And then at some point during the interview, that person who's interviewing switches up their game and says, I'm sorry, wait. I meant to say these are things that Trump has said and done. And like immediately you watch these people go from complete condemnation to avid support and defense. Yeah. And it's like, it's the way it's alive in my being right now. I watched that and it's just this sinking feeling, you know? I often talk about the fact that parallel perceptual realities are my nightmare. That's the thing that keeps me awake at 3 o'clock in the morning. And this was another one of those moments where I'm like, it is more necessary for us to disidentify, to become aware of our biases, and to be so damn careful about polarizing than ever before. But I mean, really, like, it's hard to really have hope in humanity and watch those clips. And it is like, it's not about whether it's, you know, conservative, Republican, Christian, or, you know, liberal, Democrat, whatever. We're all the same. It would have been the exact same if you saw them do the reverse for Biden supporters. So it's a very, very impactful statement about human psychology, I think.
And human tribalism. I mean, we have been conditioned. I have been conditioned in my generation to choose Coke versus Pepsi, iPhone versus Android, you know, the list, WWE wrestling versus TNT wrestling. You know what I mean? And the tribalism's deep. It's like, no, if you're not in this club, you know, I don't want to hear it. And if it's in this club, it's okay. Even if that iPhone is made by slaves, modern day slavery. We're like, fuck yeah, we're okay with it because I'm on that team. And that tribalism is such a dangerous game, but it's an inherent part of being human.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do also have this sense that the poles, like if you're speaking in political terms, as there's an energetic polar shift, a polarity shift that's happening, there's also a shift happening politically, where liberal views that are now considered liberal were once conservative and vice versa. Are you experiencing that as well as you look at this idiocracy?
Oh, hugely. And like, I gotta be honest with you guys, it was 2020 is when this whole thing went south for me. It was unbelievable. You know, 2020 is when all of a sudden all the things that I would have normally really backed, it was like, wait. I feel like I'm living in reverse land.
Yeah.
You know? So yeah, I'm watching that polar shift in a huge way. But it's not like this has never happened before in politics. I mean, most people don't understand that the Republican Party was actually the first party to be the one to openly bring the black demographic post-slavery in. So there was this entire movement of the Black Elephant Party, which was, you know, so it was the Democratic Party that was anti-blacks, basically, back in the day. And most people don't know that, so yeah, we're seeing another one of these major shifts within the political sphere.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, you're saying it's happened before. I think that's how energy works. It's like once you go to one extreme, it shifts the pendulum over, and then that perpetual kind of cycle. It's probably been happening since the ideas of politics and the democracy were happening in Greek caves or wherever this was happening. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's a part of the reality is that things in motion stay in motion. Energy keeps moving. So how could we expect anything less? And it highlights the need for our actual discernment, our ability to make decisions not based on tribe, but based on data, based on facts, and based on our standards, our moral compass. Our moral compass has just like been lost at sea.
Oh yeah. That's the moving out of shadow tribe into conscious tribe.
There it is. Say more about that.
Well, we are a tribal species, and that's something that I'm very interested in talking about because of the fact that our movement towards a single-family household has really been at the heart of so much destruction within human society. We can't meet our needs within the structure of society that we have created, so we're going to be moving back towards tribe, but tribe is not without its shadows, so to speak, and there have been like you talked about, the groupthink or the biases, or, people holding themselves back from their own best interests for the sake of approval of the group. I could sit here and list 1.5 million of these tribal shadows, and those create massive amounts of wounding that push people towards just wanting to live sort of their own life on their own terms and be all about themselves, So it can even polarize people to the opposite extreme, which I really see in today's world. There's just this absolute fixation on independence and on autonomy and on me, to the unhealthy extreme. So what we're needing to do for the sake of our own needs is to move back towards tribe, but this time what we're supposed to be creating, more in alignment with what most people have called utopia, is a way of living in tribe that is not wrought with all of these, shadows that are so indicative to tribe or have been in the past.
Yeah. And so how do we do it?
Becoming more and more and more and more conscious. I feel like we're going to keep coming back to this. It's not really an option for us as individuals to not commit to the path of awakening awareness. We can't just move through this life in an unconscious way. And that means we need to be profoundly questioning everything. Everything we're doing, everything we're seeing, everything.
And in 2020, it was also the time of the Great Awakening. There's the other side of the doom and gloom coin where people are waking up. Is that still true for you? Do you still feel the awakening happening at an accelerating rate?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Does that give you any glimmer of optimism?
For the individuals themselves, yeah.
For the individuals.
It gives me long-term optimism. A lot of times, people are like, Teal, you're just really getting into this doomy attitude. And I'm like, well, that sort of depends on whether you're talking about like a short-term or a long-term view.
Mm-hmm. I'm talking about the long game. That's where I come from.
I'm playing the long game, basically. Long game, I feel totally optimistic.
Yeah.
Well, for the most part. It depends what we do with the planet. In general, I feel long-term optimism. It's just, I feel optimism long-term the same way that I would for a friend that's in the middle of a horrible divorce. Things often have to get worse before they get better,
Yeah. So let's talk about one of the ways we drop into this time of conscious awakening. And I'm talking about exploring ancestral healing.
Oh no, you're about to take me down the train of my favorite subject. Okay.
How did I know? Ancestral healing, it's a part of your journey that you displayed early on in your public career, your own personal healing. And so all these years later, in this current time, how has the work of ancestral healing shifted or even maybe gained some more importance?
Right now, when you look at the macrocosmic picture of humanity and the trouble that humanity is getting itself into and the direction that it's headed, which is, trust me, right now, not a good direction, a lot of that is backed by these ancestral patterns, which just keep continuing for generation after generation. People who study, human patterns throughout history will be the first to tell you that cycles are repeating. They're the first, when huge political things happen, to be like, wait, this is just like the 1930s, So it doesn't take a genius to look at those repetitive patterns, but very few people look at those repetitive patterns through the lens of it being ancestral trauma, in fact. It's things that people went through far before our time that have not died, they have not been resolved, they have not been transmuted. They're just being repeated. It's just, oh, now this is that, but version 2020, And so right now we're being called, so as to not repeat the cycle again, to become aware of these ancestral patterns within each one of us so that we stop feeding momentum into those detrimental patterns and instead to shift those patterns so that we're benefiting the trajectory of our personal family line, which on a macrocosmic level means that we're progressing the totality of humanity.
Therefore, would it be appropriate to also consider this descendant healing? Because I feel like in the work and in the spiritual ways right now, indigenosity is very like in the forefront, you could say. and then people looking at their ancestors and doing the deep ancestral healing, but not holding in the forefront of the awareness, like, why are we doing this? Who are we doing this for? Are we really trying to heal 3 grandmas back? No, it's for my daughter who's here right now. It's for her. It's for
Yep.
I guess I would say in the land of service, it's actually not even for me. I'm a hollow vessel in this equation. And so maybe putting some, okay. Let me know what you think about that. But like putting more of the emphasis on who we're doing it for and the why. Because a lot of people get stuck in the work too, where it's just like never ending, right?
Oh, ancestral healing is never ending.
True.
But that's what makes it so fun.
You're one of these people. You're in it. You're in it for the long game.
I kind of experience ancestral healing to be like an Easter egg hunt. Like some of those Easter eggs, when you find them, you open it and it's like horror, you know? But it's like, it's really powerful information. Even those eggs, which I have cracked open that feel like horror, that present, difficult conundrums for the soul to deal with, it's still like the amount of power in your hands makes for such a profound and deep relationship with life. So it's almost like, I almost compare the ancestral healing journey to a lot of shamanic work. Anybody who's experienced shamanic medicines will tell you that the down journeys are often the very most profound and often the very most beneficial, even though they're the hardest, right? So it's like you're either finding Easter eggs that contain that, or Easter eggs where you open it and you're like, amazing! You're on cloud 9, like bouncing around. And because of that, it's like I don't really see ancestral healing, if you really get into it, at the degree that I have, right? Or that is possible. It's not like you want it to end, because it's just more nuggets of information, more awareness, which leads to just more. It's like, more changes, more benefits, more profound depth, more, it creates this richness that I feel like most people are completely cut off from in today's modern world, especially in, certain races and certain societies.
Yeah. Do you feel the emphasis I'm putting on the descendant part of the equation?
Yeah, I do.
You're also a mother. I imagine there's elements of the work that you do that are impactful for your relationship with your descendants.
I want to stress that every single thing you do impacts your descendants. Everything. Every action, every word, every decision, everything you heal or don't heal, everything. Yeah, I cannot stress enough how anything you do upstream affects anything downstream, and we could look at it like that when it comes to descendants. Your descendants are essentially downstream from you. So let's say that running through your family line is this pattern of aloofness, and that pattern of aloofness has made it so that, every person who's born into that family doesn't feel emotionally received. At a certain point, you just got to be like, I'm done with this. Okay, I am looking back. I understand that this is something that's been running through the line for X amount of time. I don't want this to be an experience that my son goes through, or that my grandchildren go through, or my great-grandchildren go through. That means the buck needs to stop with me.
Do you feel it happening in your own way?
Yeah.
You have to. You famously have like a really traumatic upbringing, right?
Yeah, and it's been really hard to understand that, within the framework of anything. It's almost like, one of the major benefits I want people to understand about ancestral healing is that it provides this opportunity to depersonalize things. And to depersonalize things is very powerful, because it means that it's less about you. When you don't take things as personally, then it's much easier, especially for certain aspects of your brain, to keep working rather than to go into fight or flight mode. It's easier to step outside of a problem and address the problem. It's actually easier to feel a sense of empowerment about it. It feels like you're part of the picture, not just of the wounding, but also of the healing of something. So, even diving into my past before I really got into this stuff, and properly obsessed with it, I very much felt like my experience within the framework of my entire family line or anybody I knew was kind of like a one-off. And it wasn't until diving into my mother's line, honestly, that I was like, oh, this has just been, a never-ending pattern of tragedies. I mean, ridiculous, senseless tragedies that just keeps pounding through this line. And the sort of dysfunctional ways that each generation copes with those profound tragedies, and that coping amplifying the whole damn thing. So suddenly it was like, okay, this actually is an ancestral thing. It's simply amplified in my life, and it would amplify even worse for my son if I was to continue this. So it puts you more in the power position of like, all right, assuming that this is just a pattern and this pattern keeps continuing, so does the way that you cope with that particular pattern, which is in and of itself another pattern. What different words, actions, and thoughts am I going to exert within the framework of my life so as to make it so that this does not repeat? And it's been so profound, and not just for me, for everybody else in my family line, you know?
Yeah.
I've been properly estranged, honestly, from a lot of my family members. I do not have a close family. My extended family is, on both sides, is fragmented all over the place. There's no grip.
Wow.
And I hated them, to be honest with you. I mean, for the vast majority of my life, it was like, I literally hate these people. It's like being born into a reptilian family where there's no real connection or closeness or attachment or pull or anything.
What was there?
And
if there wasn't that, what was there?
Detachment, disengagement, a profound emotional chill, the capacity to disconnect, distraction. It's like on both sides you see, you know, to make this racial, which sometimes we have to do when we're looking, you know, into the picture of our history and genealogy. If we're going to throw out a gross generalization, the white races have been the ones to really create a sense of alienation within the families. It's like the opposite of enmeshment trauma. It's kind of like, you're sort of expected to go do you. No, I'm not really thinking about whether you're going to be here on holidays. That's not expected. I don't even know you. You know, so.
Is it truly the race, or is it the culture or lack of culture?
It's both. So it's like we can generalize about races, but we can even look within the races. You'll see pockets where you know, there would be, say, the presence of a higher degree of closeness, and pockets where it's like, oh, the entire life experience or even, you know, wartime experience has made it so that this culture is just, you know, infected with this way of being, right?
Yeah, and I agree with you. Listen, I live in Southern California. Like the Mexican culture, the families are together, the abuelas are in the house, like in the parks, the birthday celebrations are massive, you know.
Yep.
And then there's the nuclear family at Chuck E. Cheese with one kid and one birthday hat on, and that's that. There is a stark difference if you want to just be real about it. You know, you can see that culturally.
Yeah, we need to, if we're going to do ancestral trauma, we need to be able to generalize, even if it's not politically correct.
Exactly. And so are you calling for that? Are you calling for that closeness of family? I mean, as this work has impacted you, do you have a relationship with your mom? Have you done the work? Like,
I have a relationship. The thing is like, all of us have a relationship which we would want with our parents or grandparents or whoever it is. That's not necessarily an accurate picture of the relationship that is possible with someone.
Correct, yeah.
So what I'm doing is a blend of like continuing to be committed to this type of work and understanding her, you know, at the same time as trying to let go of this like deep need for her to be something that she's not going to be and does not want to be, which has been both very difficult, but also very freeing, you know, because I feel like it opens up the space more for what's actually possible. But I definitely, through going through what I have with watching the ancestral patterns as they've played out in terms of the picture of the abuse that I went through, I've developed a much greater level of compassion for my family members, despite the amount of damage that they may have caused me through their complete neglect. And I mean, extended family members even more so than immediate, believe it or not. That's what shocked me. It's like to see the origins of some of these things, you know, tragic deaths where people are growing up without parents, you know, things like that. where oh, well, if you've never ever seen any of these types of emotional resources displayed, obviously you don't know what to give. And we're living in a really beneficial time right now in this way, which is that in the age of information, we have a lot of resources available to us if we've never experienced something before. The fact that we can even just go to Google or should walk into a library, which by the way is also very new. It's not like, the self-help genre is brand new. It's 1980s really. So everything before then was like, oh, if a person's born and they've got this issue with feeling completely like they don't belong, or they're dealing with gender issues or whatever it is, it's like you didn't have this database to kind of go say, oh, what do I do given that I don't know? It's just everybody's kind of bumbling around, wrecking each other's lives or surprise benefiting them. So, I developed a lot of compassion for the fact that a lot of these people were put in these positions where they tried to cope in the best way they could. They didn't know how to change these patterns. Nobody was there helping them. And it feels very instinctual, like most of it, And it's almost like you get a picture for the fact that everybody's doing the best they can with what they have from where they are. And not only that nobody is the villain of their own story. When I've been doing historical work, that is something that has struck me powerfully, which applies to much more than just my own personal genealogy. Is just in the picture of history, no man sees themselves as the villain, which means they always have some kind of profound perspective or motive for doing what they're doing. And there's a deep desire to understand that that has been born within me.
Yeah. And so you're right. Maybe we can't control the ideal relationship that we dream of having. It's not possible. And in the work that I do with men, we do a lot of having men stand in to represent that man's father, to have the conversation that you're never going to have. Just honestly, you're never going to have this conversation, so why not have it right here, right now? And this can be so moving. It can be so powerful. So we don't have that control, but one relationship that we do have command of is the one with ourself. Another topic you like, self-love.
I love that topic, yep.
Maybe even the mastery of self-love, if there is such a thing. I'm a big fan of this topic as well. I feel in my life, with the hand I've been dealt, I have a never-ending well. Like I wake up with a full cup, and it feels great. And I'm so grateful to the ancestors for that full cup. I don't know how it happens.
Nice.
There's trauma all around me, but I do feel blessed in many ways. What is your journey? What is your self-love journey? What has it been?
My self-love journey actually started when I escaped from all of the abusive past, and it was just the beginning, because everybody sort of has the escape scene. I'm away from the environment. It's like, roll credits. No, it's not actually how it works. So, I got out of the abuse and was like, oh, I'm a hot mess. I don't know how to do life normally. So, part of that was just realizing that I had this whole plethora of behaviors which was really detrimental to me. Whether it was cutting or, hypersexuality, not using any discernment with a desensitization to fear, all kinds of things. So it started to happen where I would go into therapists who were trying to help me with this, it was like Santa's bag level of trauma, where like you just keep reaching in and it's like, oh look, you got a whole house in there. Like, what else could be in there? It's its own world. And I kept hearing from people, you just need to love yourself, Teal. You need to learn to love yourself. And it got to the point where I was ready to pull a bazooka out of my jacket and shoot people. I was so mad. I mean, I just can't even explain the level of fury I felt, because and it's still my fury, by the way, because in the self-help field, I detest abstract concepts. I hate them. Why do I hate them? Because I don't care whether they're objectively true or not if you can't find some way to practically apply them. And it becomes a mask for when people don't actually know what the hell they're talking about. And that's what it was. I'm telling you right now. It was a lot of people who were like, oh, I love the idea of self-love, but I don't know what the hell it is. Which is why when you pin somebody down and say, okay, what does it mean to love yourself? Most people go dead silent. They can't answer you. And so it started to scare me because I was like, all right, I understand that. I get it. I need to treat myself better. I need to love myself better. How? How do you go from hating yourself to liking yourself? How do you go from these horrific behaviors that I've got towards myself to something more beneficial? And the fact that nobody could answer me was terrifying. So I had a little meltdown, and then I had, what happened that usually happens for me when I have a meltdown, which is, all right, I guess it's me then. So I thought, look, I'm on my own here. Like there's not, I've not met anybody who understands what this is. And so I got to figure it out. I want to dive into the concept of love in general. What does that mean if it's applied to the self? And I came up with this idea of studying people who do love themselves, juxtaposed to people who really don't.
Did you do that? Did you actually do a study?
Oh man. It was, of course, it was not like official, but yeah. Yes, I went crazy. I must have been so obnoxious during those days because it was like, no matter what social setting.
What type of questions would you ask to determine whether someone truly loved themselves or not?
God, it was like a proper interrogation. And anytime I met with somebody who exhibited, these traits, I started to identify traits in people who really did love themselves, right? And anytime I felt like I was in the room with one of those people where, they demonstrate a belief, that was on that spectrum, it was like, all right, you've just entered the freaking courtroom, my friend. And why does that not make you feel like you're betraying everyone around you? And why does that not lead to this? And when did you start to feel that way? I mean, it was an interrogation, right? And what came out of that interrogation was a very clear idea about what self-love was, how to execute self-love, right? And how to get people there. And I started applying these things to myself in a very aggressive way. I love to take my own medicine. If I was a scientist, I'd totally be the one that tests on myself. So I went to town and I was like, this is going to be my commitment.
In a way you are. I have to imagine. All of these thought practices, exercises, modalities, I know that you've done so much of them. So in a way, we all are kind of our own science experiment.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So during those years, I went really, 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 really deep, applying all of these concepts to myself. And
what did you find?
It's really hard to go from self-hate to self-love, is what I found.
Can you love the part of yourself that hates yourself? Can that person get some love?
Well, that's where I went.
Okay. So
I do have to say that what shocked me is that we've got this idea before we understand the concept of resistance or protector parts within this personality spectrum that are dedicated to preserving, we could call them detrimental behaviors for our own sake. Now, before I really went down this path, like most people, I was thinking, you don't love yourself because you've just been deprived of these things. So I'm thinking, the first time that I ever put love into water, this is one of the exercises I teach people, is to put their hands around a glass of water, and for 2 minutes, they got to set a timer, because the more strong and intense your focus is, the better, and 2 minutes is pretty much the max that most people can maintain until they've really practiced. You focus loving something, whatever you love the very most. It's not really that you're doing self-love. Most people who don't love themselves can't approach love from the attitude of giving it to themselves.
They have to give it to something.
Yeah, something. So like, let's say that you had this incredible relationship with your grandfather or grandmother. You think about that person, and you think about the way you feel towards them, and you intentionally send that energy into the water. Now, understanding that water is a keeper of memory, it's a very interesting element, because it keeps the memory, and it structurizes differently depending on what focus goes into it. So in this exercise, you then drink the water. Now, I'm thinking, I've been so deprived of self-love, like this is it's just giving myself a resource I've never had. Oh, hell no. This is when I start to create, my own little PhD in resistance. Because when I went to drink that water, all of me was like, no, like, what is going on? So I started to ask these questions and started to see that there's a part within me, or was, that was really maintaining resistance to the self. And so at first, my attitude towards it was like, I've got an internal enemy. That's how most people feel when they've got parts that sabotage them, right? So it's scary. You're like, oh no, sort of feels like you've got this great white shark that's living internally, whose entire modus operandi is to ruin your life, and that goes hand in hand with this incredibly violent self-talk, I'm sitting there holding the water, for example, and the thoughts that are going on in my head are things like, God, you're such a freaking idiot,
Yeah.
And I'm like noticing this it's like a chaos, it's like a war.
Because that's what you learned. I have to imagine that's what you learned. If there wasn't this example of love right in front of your eyes, it was this other thing that was telling you the exact opposite. It was telling you all the horrible things.
And I had internalized it all. But I did what I do when I'm in the scientific mode, which is like I get very, very curious.
Yes.
And curiosity is something interesting. It's funny because I've never talked about this on an interview before, but I feel like curiosity is an interesting mental state to lean back into, especially when you're in a really resistant state, because we can't really access maybe higher frequency things like approval. But curiosity, most people can in fact access. So I leaned back into the curiosity for myself and started to really want to understand these aspects of myself that I identified as these internal enemies. And I started to notice a trend when I worked with them directly, which, now I've got whole teachings around because I've never encountered anything else, which is that these aspects of self which are against you, right, are not really against you at all. And that was a revolutionary concept, the idea that self-hate can in fact be a way of protecting yourself. And when I realized how that was working within my own system, it was one of those eureka moments. Like if I had written a thesis, I would have thrown it over the balconies. I did it! I cracked a theory! You guys! I was freaking out, Because, it transformed everything. It transformed everything in terms of the way that I dealt with myself. It transformed that feeling that I had, there was no more internal enemy. There was just parts of me that I didn't understand enough to do the right thing with.
And the curiosity was like, how is this serving me? How is this serving me?
Exactly.
That's a great question for us to ask.
But I started even without that. Because even that's an advanced thought.
Okay.
Even that is to walk into something with an assumption. Mm-hmm. For me, it was I didn't even want to assume that it was for me. I was open to it being yeah, I want you to die. I literally, I almost wanted it to be so open that I had no assumption or projection that it was for or against or anything. Lo and behold, why are you doing this? Because if I don't, this happens. Oh, there you are. You are for me. But yes, now we can safely say, but I want people to figure this out for themselves, we can safely say that there's no such thing as a part internally that is against you. It doesn't exist.
And so what is that part? What is that part? What is the usefulness of that part?
Which one specifically? Because we've got a whole handful of
that internal enemy, the voice that's telling you no, essentially.
Okay, so first thing we should say is that when we identify an internal enemy, we're talking about one thing, but really there could be several parts that behave this way. Some people would name their internal enemy that internal voice, like the internal critic. Other people would name their enemy the part that keeps engaging in addictions. Each one of these parts is different, but what they share is their role. It's a part of self that is protecting the self in a way that is detrimental to prevent greater harm. So it's a part of you that is in a profound lose-lose and has essentially picked the best lose out of two scenarios.
That was dope. That was really well said. Let me just explore this for a second. Because we're talking about love, and I want to talk about this archetype of love, or the lover. And so the deflated or the imbalanced aspect to the lover is addiction.
Okay.
And the other half of the lover, or like maybe the inflated or positive side, could be seen as empathy. Okay? And so you're naming that part that brings you to the addict, and also that inner critic, that part that brings us to the self-destruction.
Yep.
And so just for someone who's there right now, they're there right now, Teal. You know, you've had years of this. I've had some years in this. What's step one? What can they do? Having the awareness right now from this conversation of these two places.
Step one is to start to do parts work with these aspects. Direct access parts work is my absolute favorite tool for people that are struggling with aspects of themselves, especially these what seem like self-hating aspects of self. To do direct access, I mean, there's people who teach parts work all over the place. There's so many modalities for parts work. It's out of control. I even did a video on this myself, you know, what is parts work and how to do it. If I was in a position of somebody who was at the very beginning, and I, you know, didn't have what I have under my belt, the first place I would go to is to look up these modalities that use parts work, pick the one that I feel like really resonates with me at that moment, and I would do a deep dive where I'm working with directly accessing these aspects, specifically whatever part I feel like I'm struggling with. So if I've got a part of me that just like chronically procrastinates, we could see that as an internal, you know, antagonist, because you maybe are losing jobs because of it or relationships because of it. And I would isolate out that aspect of you so as to do a deep dive to understand everything you can about that part. And I think it's super beneficial to have somebody else leading the parts work. You can do it yourself. Like what I try to do is I try to make every suggestion something that a person can do if they're completely isolated. And then everything's just an improvement upon there. So you can do parts work on your own. But if you involve somebody else in leading you through the process, it's quite profound, because we are not, when we're on the outside of a situation, limited by our constructs, mental constructs, in the same way that we are inside our own perspective. So another person might have the idea to ask certain questions we would never have even thought, or look at it from a different angle we would never have even thought, which is why I feel like the external facilitation for parts work is one of the most profound things that exists in healing today. It's one of the reasons why I've ramped up my teachings around this, basically. Since a lot of years, I've been like, this is something people need to be using, because integration is absolutely necessary right now.
Just to add on to that, I think the group is necessary. We do at Sacred Sons, we do all our work in groups and circle. Yes, with the professional facilitation, absolutely. And that witness from the group can be so healing. On the other side of that depth of work, it's just like being alone in your bedroom and having an aha moment is one thing. Being raised up by your brothers and sisters, being held by that community it's absolutely life-changing.
Yeah, it's totally life-changing.
Yeah.
So the reason that we want to dive into these parts with direct access is because the more you understand about a part, suddenly the better position you're in to actually do what's applicable for the thing. So what I mean by this is, let's say that I'm going to dive into what it is to be a giraffe. I'm now better able to act according to the giraffe, right? Like if the giraffe has an issue or a concern, I can now address it because I know what the hell it is. So it takes the guesswork out of the equation, and it puts you in the position of understanding very powerfully what your needs are and very powerfully what it is you're trying to avoid. So you're in a position of choice, essentially. It puts you in the position of free will, where you're able to be in a place where you make decisions for and about yourself, but taking all parts of yourself as a part of yourself, which we are not doing. Now, if we really want to understand self-love at its most basic element, it is to reject, deny, and disown parts of the self. I'm actually a firm believer of the idea that you can't actually conceptualize of self-love without recognizing fragmentation. You can't actually understand what self-love is unless you recognize that there is one part that is doing the loving, and another that is, doing the hating, and another that is being hated. And oh no, now I'm almost recognizing, even in just that scenario, 3 aspects inside me. It's only when you understand that element of consciousness that you can grasp, oh wait, there is an I that is watching, and there is an I that is behaving towards another part that I also am.
Yes.
This is what actually puts us in this position to disidentify from the different fragments or aspects of self so as to positively own them. So what's happening here is a seriously graduated spiritual practice, ironically, where we're developing non-self at the same time as self being a conscious choice. It's very different than what spiritual practice has been for so many centuries, which is the attempt to get away from our humanness, the attempt to get away from ego, which, by the way, personality is part of. It's almost like we've done this in rejection of, And what we're being called to do right now, which I definitely believe that parts work is a big part of, is disidentifying so that we can then turn around towards the ego or towards the personality or towards the temporal self and really positively own it and meet its needs. So there's a symbiosis between temporal and non-physical.
I knew you were, I think of you as a spiritual leader. I didn't think of you as a scientific savage. This is great. I love knowing like the depth of detail that you have explored these things to, because most people aren't. Because most people who are actually out there talking about it, they are not doing this depth of actual work and specifically the bringing in the practical application of the work. Like I said, you've been a mirror to millions, maybe virtually, but you work in person with people all of the time. It's another one of the things that you were so courageous in doing in your career, which is like, listen, I'm gonna process people on stage in front, film it and show it. Showing the work that you're doing, I think, is a really noble thing. It also creates waves of ripples of healing because we get to like tap into those places. Is there anything more that you wanted to say in this? Now what I really want to label this as, I think you're a mastery of self-hatred in a good way.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're a master of self-love. I think you're a master of self-hatred. Like that is what you have actually gone in and orchestrated.
That would fit in alignment with me as a shadow master here. So yeah.
Totally. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what that makes me, but you even said it, like, think of a positive experience with my grandmother. I feel my grandmother's love, both of my grandmother and my granny's love in me at all times. I feel
it from you. So yeah.
Thank you. Like I have that on tap in the shadow work for me. Man, I don't want to go into me. I want to stay with you. Let's talk about, we're talking about self-love, self-hatred, self-destruction. Let's talk about destruction, lust, and more specifically in your 2024 predictions, which I love. Thank you. Thank you from all of us for continuing to do them. You named this piece Endurism. Yeah, I want to go into that because as with the self-love thing where it can be like a bunch of fluff, this impotence to want to endure, to keep going, to keep creating, to keep making content, to keep showing up, you're saying that can also be a shadow.
Yeah, but I mean, we can make Endurism a lot more practical for people. It's like, that you're in a marriage that doesn't work. It's causing you a lot of pain. No matter how much energy you put towards it, nothing changes, and you're just going to keep yourself in a situation. So if we want to define Endurism, it's literally just keeping yourself in a situation that is not in your best interests. And people have been trained to do this. I mean, in large part, this is what we're doing with kids in school. There's a fine line between teaching somebody that when they're met with challenges and they push through and persevere through those challenges, there's a reward at the end, and teaching somebody that, for the sake of something like societal approval or for the sake of avoidance of something, like, my fears about ending up alone in the scenario that I just mentioned. We are training each other, in fact. When we put a kid in a school and they hate it, it doesn't work at all, they're miserable, and we say, it doesn't matter whether you don't like it, you're going to have to go. We're training a person that when all parts of themselves, or even some, yell and say, this is not right for me, you continue anyway. And I right now we've got an illness of Endurism. So it's going to be a big theme in 2024.
Yeah. How do we end endurism? I would assume we have to first do it on the individual level before we can do it on a collective level. But here, something that we're enduring as humanity is enduring a small few of us putting into global conflict and wars and catastrophe. When we, in fact, have all of the power, all of the resources, all of all of humanity is with us. But yet we're enduring this from a really small few. How do we get out of this cycle?
Getting out of the cycle of endurism is about facing whatever it is that we're afraid to encounter as a result of getting out of whatever situation that we're stuck in. Of course, this puts each one of us in a very scary position, because when you face what it is that's motivating you to stay in a situation, that consequence you're really, really scared of, right? You realize just how serious it is usually. We're faced with questions like, wait, am I going to be the person that has to go off the grid? Oh no.
Oh yes.
there's a lot there. Or am I going to be the person who, because of this, loses my connection with my sister?
Right.
It depends on the person. Or because of this, whatever it is, we've all got our things. On an individual level, we've got our things that we're trying to avoid. And we're being asked right now to make changes that are terrifying. Systems stay in place because we're afraid of the collapse. And I feel like if a person looks at you in the face and says, I'm not afraid of the collapse, that is a person who's not in reality. So we need to be facing these things which we're trying to avoid through endurism, is the answer. And when you face whatever it is that you're really afraid of, that's keeping you stuck in endurism, again, you're put in the power position. All right, am I going to consciously choose to continue doing this? Because when we're actually caught in a state of endurism, we're not consciously choosing. Right? We're not really sitting there and being like, no, I'm going to stay in this situation. And this is why. And this is why, how it matters to me. And this is how I'm going to make it better. You don't see that kind of conscious process. It's just almost like an instinctual behavior that is taking place below the conscious mind. So the more conscious we can get about that, actually, the better this goes for us, whether we're going to choose with our free will towards the consequences of staying in a situation or choose with our free will towards the consequences of the opposite. What you see when people choose consequences is this giant open door of opportunity towards answering to those consequences in an empowered way. One of the examples I love giving is if I decide that I'm going to be a professional surfer, one of the consequences that I must accept that I'm going to face is being crushed by waves or
eaten by a shark.
Eaten by a shark, freezing cold temperatures. Now, what's interesting is there's all kinds of ways that you can improve or make it better, your relationship to that. It could be mental things. It could be spending time with sharks and understanding their behavior better. It could be inventing technology that sends out little, noises that makes it so that the sharks don't eat you. The list is kind of endless, but it's not until we accept whatever consequence we're going to choose that we're able to actually meet those consequences in such a constructive way. And so much of expansion, human expansion, happens when a person finally does that. So the opportunity that exists on the other side of this endurism within the human race is that when we're really looking at the consequences that we're afraid of that are making us keep these detrimental structures there, and we're like, all right, I could face fill in the blank. Now, all of a sudden, you have an open door for inventions, new ways of going about it, new approaches to being slammed with those consequences. Let's say that they're just going to happen. You're no longer in as powerless of a space as you are when you're just sitting there in an abstract way fearing something, not even really diving into the fear.
Yeah. This is super interesting. So how do we get out of that kind of martyr complex? Like, I'm just going to endure it and take it on. And that becomes the reason for doing it, is just to be in that thing that we are familiar with. Does that make sense how I'm asking it? Because what I believe is, the real martyr has to lean into ultimate surrender, not more endurance, but surrendering maybe to the outcome, to the consequences,
There's no such thing as a martyr.
Say more.
All right, you're getting a brand new teaching. I've never taught this anywhere else. There's actually no such thing as a martyr, because any martyr, what they're doing when they're sacrificing aspects of themselves, they're doing so for something that is profoundly for themselves. So let's say that we could point to, say, Joan of Arc as a martyr, right? Now, if you dive into understanding that psychology and her identifications in the life that she led, you will see that when she was doing the things she was doing, it was for her. There was no way for it not to be for her. You could say the same thing of Braveheart. Most people are more familiar with that because we have a popular movie made about it.
William Wallace. Mel Gibson.
Yeah, we can see William Wallace. Yeah, the ultimate martyr for Scotland. Well, guess what? When you're so identified with Scotland, Scotland is you. Not only that, he's attached to a way of life, the Scottish way of life. Now he's about to see that go away. So when he does what he does, do we call that martyrdom, or do we call that what it is, which is I've decided that is the best way I can act for myself possible. Does it benefit other people? Hell yeah, it does. But you will never meet a martyr where there isn't some element of self, service in whatever it is that they are doing. A huge element of it, in fact.
Yeah, I think there has to be. There has to be. It's a motivating force, and that internal motivating force to do the thing, whatever that is, and in your examples, like to die for the cause, creates this collective inspiration. And I think, and maybe it's the word martyr that we could reconsider. We can reconsider, but don't you think that no,
it's okay. I want to make it darker. Let's make it darker.
Make it darker. Take us down.
There are some people who self-sacrifice for the sake of a sense of personal goodness. So their entire identity about themselves being good and right is all a way about how much they can hurt themselves. So, I have to make that movement because this is super dark. This is where we have an attachment to self-harm, basically, and an attachment to self-sacrifice because of how deeply we need to feel a sense of goodness. Now, these people, resting at the foundation of their entire personality structure, is an ocean worth of shame. But it's very tempting to sit on the outside and watch these people and say, oh, God, you need to stop giving yourself up. Oh, they're not. Believe me, they're not. They're going directly for their own rightness and goodness. They're going directly for a remedy to their own shame.
Do you think that is true with Yeshua, the Christ? Do you think that was true of this man that we call Jesus?
No, I don't. I think that what happened is you have an individual who did a lot of study with different esoteric groups, somebody who was special, very special to begin with in terms of the intention for life, very special in terms of the alignment, I think, that this individual had with the non-physical self that was not fully lost upon coming into the temporal. Upon the deep engagement with these different esoteric circles which he encountered, do I believe that we are dealing with a being which experienced levels of enlightenment? Yes, I do. Now, what happens with enlightenment is very complicated because you don't get this martyrdom mentality from doing that. Instead, what happens is you start to access higher dimensional fields. In those higher dimensional fields and levels of access, you start to understand concepts of oneness. Therefore, the only thing that becomes real is love. You understand things like free will, and so what becomes highly important is choice. So, martyrdom is not a thing anymore because you are others. There's no perception of self versus other in the same way that the vast majority of people experience it. So do I think that he was in an attitude of martyrdom doing this? No. Do I think that what happened is people watched that who were still not at those levels of awareness, who were, projecting all kinds of religious indoctrination onto this person? Yes, I do. I think that Christ has been bastardized by the people who interpreted him.
Yeah, or co-opted his message, or profited off of it, etc.
Well, why else do you think that all of the different, it's like the gospel according to, and they're all so different. You're like, wait, are we talking like Old Testament Christ or like New Testament Christ? 'Cause they're very different. You know what I mean? So, I think about this a lot. I think about this actually a lot with my own teachings. I think about how when anything that I say goes through the filter of somebody else's consciousness, it is interpreted in such drastically different ways, sometimes even the exact opposite of what I'm meaning, you know? And then you add to this the concept of language. I mean, just pray for us all. Why? Because, you know, when you involve things like language, a language is a representation of the way that a culture sees the world. So when you go into cultures like, you know, the Hispanic culture, right, with Spanish, everything is male or female. That's how you see the world, right? When you you study the Hopi language, everything is spoken as if it's an ing. So like, this is tabling, I'm tealing. And so already there's this concept of transience, right? And so when you start to study these ancient languages in which, you know, they would have been speaking during Jesus's time, it becomes even confusing, this concept of I am God's son, because the word son or daughter essentially translates to extension.
Wow.
So were they thinking? Yeah, like were they thinking of, was he thinking of himself as the Son of God? As of us as children? Or was he trying to teach you are extensions of God? I mean, it starts to get just like really woo, you know?
Yes. And just to bring in another culture, the Rastafarian culture, the concept of I and I. When you were talking about parts work and you were holding that part of yourself and speaking love to it and receiving love from it, that's the I and I. Right? That's the God within, recognizing the God within. And so can we walk with that awareness? Our language is also one of separation. Me, you, them, they. Can we walk with the I and I? You know, I see you I see you this way, Teal. You know, I see you as someone who's able to operate in that space, truly, and to exist in that space. And maybe that's the place that we are beckoned to arrive to as extensions of each other.
That is the place that we are being beckoned to arrive. And it will mirror what we do on the inside is going to mirror on the outside. So we're being brought to this place where this relationship, as you call it, the I and I, this relationship is like a dance that we are learning to master. And it's got to be something which we commit to mastering. Why? Because the principles that apply to each different aspect of ourselves is so different. We have to find a meeting of minds, you know. The place that the temporal self exists in is a profoundly different experience than the place that the non-physical self resides in.
Yeah. And if you can even visit there if you want.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's say that we end up creating this fusion within ourselves, which is humanity really stepping into a state of vast potential that we have come into this life with. If we master that internal relationship, we will learn to master external relationships. Now, I don't think it needs to be a 1-2 step. We can be doing them at the same time. But we're going to grasp the capacity, master the capacity to be able to create a symbiosis with others. We'll be able to understand them enough to be able to find a meeting of minds, I think. That is my dream for humanity, if you want to know the truth. It's to get to a place where humanity has transcended the zero-sum game.
And entered into the infinite game of the all.
Entered into a state where the practice is win-win.
Yes, win-win.
Where we're profoundly creative enough.
Let's get that winfinity of abundance going on this planet. Sorry to interrupt. Keep going.
No, you didn't interrupt. You got it. It doesn't matter whether we're dealing with another person or we're dealing with an environment that we live in or we're dealing with something that we're eating. Humanity is going to progress in the direction of mastering the win-win. That or we will no longer exist. That's our option today.
There she is. She's tealing. Teal is tealing again, guys. That needs to be a new hashtag, tealing. Like whenever you're on a really good one in the spiritual realms and it's flowing, maybe that's tealing. Maybe that's what we're the new channeling. I like you as a verb. So I am interested in that, in your dream for humanity. And in you as the person. Again, I feel called to come back to you and to where you are, maybe all the stories that you still carry. What is the story of Teal Swan? I'm going to whittle it down.
Okay.
We've been shown things. We've seen you for years, as I'm saying, but like, gosh, is it too soon to ask for your legacy? Maybe a little too soon, but what is that story of Teal Swan? Like, what is your arc?
I feel like my arc is to change the way that people think. I'm here to change the mind of humanity. Now, why that's so important is that when you change somebody's mind, the way that they do things changes. So while you'll see me in the future become much more invested in creating tangible changes, programs, centers, all kinds of things, to create actual tangible changes within society for the benefit of not only mankind, but also other beings that share this life as well. I feel like the real story of my life is that when I'm sitting here changing the mind of humanity, anybody who's listening to me is going to change what they do. So let's say that, I'm talking in these videos to somebody who's 12 years old right now. Maybe that 12-year-old who grew up watching my videos sees the world in a very different way than other people do. Because of that, maybe that is the child who ends up, creating a movie that changes the way that people see love. Or maybe that child is the person who creates a new way of teaching, a whole new model for education. Maybe that is some person who comes up with an alternative to the economic system. Maybe these are people who are actually going to be capable of having relationships, and the basis upon which they choose relationships is different. You've got a whole group of people who are having conscious relationships. That changes the story for every single child they have or don't have. So there's this major ripple effect happening from people who have grown up listening to these types of ideas. They can't see the world the same way. And because of that, I genuinely believe that what they will be doing for this world will improve the way that this world works.
Yeah. I feel like I want 2024 to be the extension lust, not the destruction lust, but to think in the ways of like how our love and how our inner light can be an extension for others, and less of the aspect of destruction, which is why I'm doing the light work out here. You know what I mean? This is my true nature is one of like yes, like full yes, we can do it.
It's interesting that you say this as your desire, because one of the things that I said in this prediction thing that I did for 2024 is that it's so important this year for us to remind each other of our potential. For that reason, I even added to my own social media channels this thing that's called a goodie of the week. So like sometimes I'll do like a funny of the week, or the goodies are basically videos or things that represent human goodness. And we're needing so badly to remind ourselves of this and remind each other of this. Whether it's a stranger who buys flowers for another stranger, or, a person who is reunited with somebody that they deeply love, or, interspecies relationships that are interesting. Whatever it is, it's just like we need to be putting at the forefront of our minds and other people's minds the potential positive. Now, this is really big when I'm saying this, right? Because I'm the shadow worker. I'm the one that's like, you got to go towards the fear. You got to go towards the negativity. This year, I'm literally saying that the remedy for everything we've got going this year, especially this destruction lust, is specifically that. We're in a doom spiral, man. And we are not headed towards a wonderful place. So right now we need to be like, you know what, we can do different. Like, here's proof of people who can do different. Here's proof of what we are capable of when we are actually in a space of loving each other, rather than, fending for our own best interests against everyone around us. I feel like it's very powerful to remind ourselves of this. And it's inspiring. I mean, you can't help but watch these things and not go, ripples are endless. I want to do something too.
I want to help people. I want to be in service.
Yeah.
And the proof is in the choice. The proof is in the choice. The proof is not in the pudding. It's not in the result. It's not in the expectation. It is in the actual choice that we make as human beings together. That's what I'm seeing. And so that's why the decision making is so important. And so like inspiring our brothers and sisters to choose differently, you know. Are you watching this podcast because you want to be the same or because you want to grow and change? I would hope it's the latter. I would hope it's you've listened this far because you believe that there is a choice.
Yeah.
And we have to no matter what happens in this death spiral that we're in, we have to remember that we always have a choice. That's the truth.
Yes. Cool.
All right, Teal. This has been very enlightening. It's been really comical at times. It's been very, very real and raw at times too. I really appreciate your candor and willingness to just drop in a little bit. Yes, let's get some sacred sons to your events. Like I said, you speak all around the world. You're an international speaker, a best-selling author, a thought leader, and now we know why. We're hearing it right here. What do you have coming up? What are you excited about in your work? What offerings do you have that our brothers and sisters can tune into?
Well, I mean, I just released the Ancestral Healing course, and this is the thing that I'm the most excited about just because of how applicable it is right now for most people. Also, just knowing how incredibly enriching the experience is. So that would be the thing that I'd be the most interested in people engaging in right now if it's not for tuning into my Saturday videos, which is on every single subject under the sun. This upcoming Saturday, I'm about to dive into this idea of sexuality being a very important element of the totality of your relationships. In fact, I'm about to, yet again, in classic form, run straight up against standard convention and advice in the relationship field.
Can you give us a little bit more of a hint in terms of like what the role sexuality plays?
Yeah. Okay. So most people who are in the field of relationship therapy and sex therapy, they see a relationship a little bit like a pie, where you've got pieces of the pie, right? And sexuality is just one piece of that pie.
But it's not.
Now, I'm about to throw this on in. I'm about to throw this on in, basically, and say that your sexuality is what stays the most closely linked to your deepest desires, most especially those ones you're ashamed of, the things, therefore, you had to suppress, deny, and disown. And because it's such a deep need and desire, there's such a deep drive for healing there, you're going to start to see somebody's sexuality or the emotional experiences that motivated their sexuality bleeding out into all elements of their relationship, not just the bedroom. So I'm about to say, basically, that sexuality is one of the hardest things to work on in a relationship. Because it's not just about sexuality. Like, you could take a couple and you could throw them in the bedroom and you could teach them all kinds of techniques to improve their experience in the bedroom. That's not going to do much, because all these, what essentially you would see, behaviors you would see, fetishes you would see, inclinations you would see in the bedroom are indicative of things that are much deeper than what's just in the bedroom, and it will bleed out into all other aspects of their life, including what type of relationship they're wanting.
Yeah. Now you've got everybody interested. Where do we tune into this talk? You're going to really go there, huh?
This is going to be on my YouTube channel. So I release a new video every single Saturday, and this is going to be the upcoming Saturday video.
Dude, the consistency that you show up with, it's unparalleled. It's got to be. I mean, I know that there's a lot of people making content, but like the consistency for me is also like that's also the proof, the longevity of what you've been able to create. In the teachings and in the ways.
Yeah, well, it's like, I mean, it's obviously there's endless things to talk about, but at the same time, it became very important to me in the beginning of my career to be there. Like, I know it's interesting, but I very much see the people who have tapped into my frequency as tribe members. It doesn't matter where they live in the world, and doesn't matter whether I will ever meet them. I definitely see them as soul tribe, and so in the very beginning of my career, it became very important for me to be there for my tribe, basically. So my consistency through the Saturday videos is a way of being there for them, staying there with them, continuing to assert the fact that I'm there.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the underlying piece here is to create the thing which you did not have, the thing that maybe you longed for. in your life. You are actually creating it. You are one who is giving back, transmuting the pain into purpose. It's all right here. It's like it's not that you've done it or that you've arrived, but it's that you're committed to doing it. It's radical. It really is. In this world, the way that things are, it's a very radical act. I also, to be a thought leader as a woman, I also feel like maybe you get unfair stuff thrown at you. Like I see that happen. I can't understand it. I got in trouble for interviewing you last time, meaning like, oh, you shouldn't do that. And it's like, what are you talking about? And it's not to say like, oh, it's because you're a woman, but man, it's a part of it. What's going on?
I understand what it is. I do understand what it is.
What
now.
is it?
It's power.
It's power.
Yeah, people naturally have a very complicated relationship with power in general. They want it, they fear it, they've been abused by it. Fear is something that sends off all kinds of red flags for people, and I am a walking ball of it. Not just because of, we can talk about power in terms of the essence of somebody's soul, but like, let's drop that off a cliff. Let's talk about the fact that beauty is perceived as power. You especially see this during the witch hunts, because when men felt like they couldn't control their arousal around women, that feels like the woman's in control, right? Let's talk about the power of something like charisma. I have high levels of charisma. I'm able to convey myself in a communicative way, which is actually very uncharacteristic for females. If you study the way that my voice is, like if you have a voice expert, study my incantations, I carry a lot of power in my voice. Fame is perceived as power. And this is even more so in today's world when the major news channels are now competing with viewership with me and with people who have the levels of viewership that I do, right? The age of social media changed everything. I don't think people understand this enough. There's no more platform. It's not like a television channel pulls all the millions of watchers. Now, CNN is competing with the people who are sharing things online, and that's a lot of power, and it scares the crap out of people, including governments. Like, somebody who has a YouTube channel with millions of followers says do something, and a million people do it at once. That's like a huge problem. So, that's an item of power. A high intellect is something which is seen as power. If you break me down, I'm basically a giant ball of power. And when people perceive me that way, it scares the crap out of them, and we're even less okay with women having power. So, when I started to understand this picture better of like, the relationship people have to power and how they're seeing that in me everywhere, it started to make a lot more sense. Why it is that people are coming up against me. Actually, the people who have an issue with my content itself are very few and far between.
Yeah.
It exists, but it's not the bulk of it. Most people have an issue.
No, it's with you. It's with you. They want to make it personal.
Yeah, it's personal. It's an issue with my character. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what's. I guess you could call it fascinating. It's fascinating for me. For you, it must be something you have to endure.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
It's horrible. Can I tell you why it's horrible?
Please.
Because if you dedicate so much energy, and literally, this is like I eat, sleep, and breathe this the same way that, let's go back to science. Let's say there's a NASA scientist whose entire existence, with sandwiches in between, is dedicated towards something like studying emperor penguins. It's like there is a need and there's a desire, however egoic it is, to be able to be proud of what it is that you do and to be able to tell people. And if it's not that I'm running into people who already know me, which I run into them all the time, the more hate pieces that are done about me, the more bias is being built up. And I can't tell you how many times I go into meetings with people or I run into them randomly at a restaurant or in the street and they're like, "You're so different than what I saw on the deep end." And I'm like, oh my God, I can't get away from this. And not only that, it's like when I meet new people, like people who aren't in the spiritual field and who don't know any of this stuff. And they're like, "What do you do for a living?" And they ask for my name. Instead of feeling proud, I feel a sense of panic because I know that what's going to happen is they're meeting me in person. They're going to be excited and they're going to go look me up. And the first thing that they're going to get hit with is, disastrous, cult leader, dangerous, manipulative, blah, 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 blah. And it affects people immensely. It does. And I like, you know, a bigger problem I'm having even than that is that it's like anybody, it's what you experience. It's that now anybody who associates with me themselves is getting attacked.
And not by like the powers that be. I was getting attacked by my people who like my podcast, whatever that is, people who like what we're doing. They were the ones turning, you know, because of the way the infiltration has happened psychically or whatever that is.
Yeah.
That's a trip.
And not, I mean, there's a very few people, you're one of the people who can handle that type of pressure, albeit it's very uncomfortable, but like, there's a whole demographic of people who cannot deal with that type of pressure. So, yeah, I mean, I'm sort of swimming and wading my way through this very difficult challenge and trying to figure out how to navigate that.
Yeah, so kind of when I asked you earlier, like, what's the story of Teal Swan? Is there an aspect or a part of you that feels like you gave some of your power away? I know that's not even tangibly possible. I'm not saying it like that, but when you allowed people to come and film and tell their version of you.
Oh, of course, and I know why I did it. I know how they hooked me. They hooked me because I was desperate for there to be a writing of the improper perception of me. Now, you can relate this back to my childhood. I was not understood at any point in my childhood. I grew up in a culture, the Mormon culture. My family was non-Mormon. I was treated very badly by that culture. To generalize, they were very cruel, and the attitude towards me and my family was like, oh, they're a sign of the second coming, because if they were exposed to the gospel and they turned the other cheek, then that's proof of the fact that they work for the demonic realms. So basically, I mean, I grew up with this sort of constant feeling of always being scapegoated. And when I got into this career and got into, you know, the hate did not start with the deep end. This started 2 years after I got into my work. And it's been this chronic thing of just feeling completely not understood and like they don't get it. Why? I mean, if they really just got it, they would feel differently about me. If they knew me, they would understand me, right? And when that film team came in, they sensed the desperation. This is, of course, we know that any desperation is dangerous. Every fish in the ocean that uses it like an angler lure to get other fish understands this. There's a point of weakness around our most desperate needs, and one of my most desperate needs was to be understood, ironically. So when they came in, essentially promising to me that this would be what writes everybody's opinion, that this is going to be somebody who's with me for so long that people are going to finally understand my motivations for this work, what it is that I'm doing, that they're going to come to like me rather than hate me. I definitely fell for that hook, line, and sinker. I think, it definitely, even when, I'm not going to say that a lot of red flags went off, because that's actually the scarier part of this whole thing.
I remember you guys were having birthday party videos. They were sending you videos. We love you. Thank you for helping us, even in our lives with our problems. I got to see that from the outside perspective.
It was a real great deception. But when I'm going back and I'm kind of like, well, was there ever any red flags that went off? It's around things like, being presented with the document and being told that I don't get to have any creative control over that, and that's just how it's going to be. And they can make, obviously because I'm a celebrity, I fall under public domain laws. Anybody can make anything about me that they want. I can't do anything about it except for retroactively. Did you know that or no?
I had no idea that was a thing.
Nobody's been able to explain to me when you sort of cross that legal line where you're considered a celebrity, but celebrities fall under public domain.
Wow.
So, being told things like that where it's like, it's not even direct interactions with the people. It's like looking at contracts like that where, I'm not realizing how hard I should fight for things like creative control over a project or not. It's like, it's almost like, yeah, well, the point of this is that I've definitely got...
But you do know, because you even said it. It's like, we're in the new time. We have everything that we need. Is there a part of you that still desires to tell a version of your story in that type of a format?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I still definitely desire that. I feel like it could have been something incredible, Some of the footage that they got over the course of the 3 years are so incredibly impactful that I'm like, God, I would kill to get that footage.
How do we get it? Give me names.
I know where it is. Yeah, that footage is owned by the documentary group, which is in New York City. And I am dying to get my hands on that footage because I would love to do a remake. I would love to get an editor who is able to go through that and actually turn it into what I wanted it to be, which was not, I mean, I want people to understand me, but I actually wanted this story to be one that was super inspiring, basically.
You know what you want? This is my presumption. You wanted the audience to feel the way that people walk away from your experiences feeling. And that is hopeful, filled with hope for humanity and a sense of healing. And a sense that healing is even possible in the first fucking place.
Exactly.
I know this because I want it selfishly for Sacred Sons too. I get to experience this all the time. And we have filmed it. And we haven't put it out because we're holding it, but we're like also not giving it away to anyone else to tell the story. So thank you for the example for us in the future who know better than to do that, because as creators, for everyone out there listening, we have everything we need. You don't need the record label. You don't need the executive. You don't need the director, the producer who's going to tell you or sell you the world. You need your vision and your passion and some people that really fucking got your back. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, well, my desperation for those things definitely made it so that even in little moments like that, I think there were certain red flags that I didn't pay attention to because of my desperation for those things. It was I think it's too harsh of a lesson, personally.
Too harsh. It's definitely a harsh one. I remember, when last time we talked, it was like right after episode 2 aired or something like that. Teal Swan, thank you so much again for your time, for the gifts, for the teachings, for the lessons, for your leadership. With that, is there any final message that you would like to leave with the brothers and the sisters who are listening?
Yeah, the message that I would leave people with is to continue to remind yourself and remind other people of the positive potential within humanity. I want you to look for proof of it wherever it exists and to share that proof with other people in a very conscious way so that we can all be reminded of the direction that we're really wanting to head in.
That's it. The proof is in the choice. Remember.
You should just make it into a t-shirt. Just make it into a t-shirt at this point. Come on.
I've got a bunch of taglines. I learned so much on this episode. Thank you so much, Teal. Until next time, again, check out Teal Swan on YouTube, on Instagram. Take the Ancestral Healing course. Look out for the sexuality talk course, calls, videos on Saturday drops, whatever they are. She's going to be diving in, bringing nothing but the truth. Appreciate you with that. Adam Jackson, Sacred Sons, Teal Swan. We're out, family.